brass key was warm from my father's hand, though the morning air inside the carriage shed was cold enough to turn our breath white. I remember the smell of harness oil, wet wool, and the pine boards beneath my boots. My wedding shirt felt too tight at the neck. The church benches were already being carried into place across the lane, and I could hear wagon wheels arriving one after another. My father closed my fingers around that key and looked at me as though he were handing me more than the door to a house. Then he gave me the sentence I would carry into my marriage for far too many years. A wife needs a steady hand, not a listening ear. I believed him. That is the part I regret. My name is Jonas. I am a husband, a father, and the head of a household in an old order Amish community. I share these stories because the plainest parts of a life can teach the hardest lessons, especially when a man finally admits where he was wrong. If you have ever received advice that sounded wise because it came from someone you respected, but later discovered it had cost you something important, you may understand this story. You are welcome to subscribe, and I would like to hear in the comments whether you believe a husband can lead well without first learning how to listen. Before I go further, I need to say something plainly. What I was told that morning was not a rule written in Scripture, and it was not a sentence every Amish husband hears. Settlements differ. Families differ. Men carry their own pride into tradition and sometimes call it wisdom. This was the counsel given to me by a man I loved and trusted, and because I trusted him, I did not examine it closely enough. I was 24 years old when I married Anna. She was 22. We had known one another through singings, family visits, and the ordinary crossings of community life. I knew how she laughed when she tried not to. I knew she always folded a dish towel twice before hanging it. I knew she could judge the heat of a cook stove by holding her palm several inches above the iron. I knew many small things about her. What I did not understand was that knowing a woman's habits is not the same as knowing her heart. On our wedding day, I thought being a good husband meant having answers before she asked questions. I thought uncertainty would make her feel unsafe. I thought a man protected his home by never showing that he could be confused, afraid, or wrong. So when we moved into the small white farmhouse my uncle had rented to us, I began our life together by making decisions quickly. The first winter, I chose where every dollar would go. I decided which field we would lease, which mare we would keep, how much grain we would store, and when we would visit her parents. Anna did not fight me. She would ask a quiet question, and I would hear resistance where there was only thoughtfulness. She might wonder whether we should wait another month before buying a cultivator. I would explain why waiting was foolish. She might say her mother needed help after an illness. I would tell her we had our own work. I believed I was keeping order. I did not notice that each answer I gave ended the conversation instead of beginning one. The first sign came over a blue enamel bowl. It was late February, and the snow along the north wall of the house had hardened into a gray ridge nearly 3 feet high. We had been married 5 months. Anna was kneading bread at the kitchen table while I worked through figures from the feed store. She asked what I thought about keeping some money aside in case the spring planting was delayed. I had already decided to use nearly all of it for seed and a second-hand harrow. I did not look up from the paper. I told her the matter had been settled. Her hands stopped in the dough for only a second. Then she nodded and kept kneading. That pause should have troubled me. Instead, I felt satisfied that I had been firm. 2 weeks later, freezing rain covered the fields. Planting was late. One of the workhorses developed a swollen tendon, and the harrow needed repairs before we used it once. We borrowed money from my brother. Anna never reminded me that she had warned me. Her silence protected my pride, and I mistook that silence for agreement. That mistake repeated itself in ways both small and large. When our first child was born, I decided Anna needed rest more than visitors, so I turned away 2 of her cousins without asking her. When she wanted to move the baby's cradle closer to the stove during a bitter week in January, I told her the room arrangement was already sensible. When she worried about our son's cough lasting more than 10 days, I said children often coughed in winter, and that fear did not help a household. By the time I agreed to take him to a doctor, he had a chest infection that required medicine. He recovered. I thank God for that. But even then, I found a way to tell myself the delay had not mattered. Pride is clever. It does not always shout. Sometimes it speaks calmly and gives reasons. Sometimes it uses words like responsibility, order, and leadership. A man can hide inside those words for years. I did. Anna became quieter, not cold, not disobedient, quiet. There is a difference, and I should have seen it. She still kept our home. She still worked beside me. She still sat next to me in worship and cared for our children with a steadiness I depended upon more than I admitted, but she stopped bringing me the first version of her thoughts. By the time she spoke, she had already shortened them. She removed the questions I might dismiss. She softened the concerns I might call worry. She gave me only what she believed I would accept. I thought our marriage was peaceful. In truth, she had learned how to avoid making waves around a man who called still water harmony. 8 years into our marriage, I saw what my way of leading had built. It was a Tuesday in October. The corn had been cut, and the remaining stalks stood in rough brown rows under a low sky. I came in after dark with mud dried halfway up my boots. Anna was sitting at the table with a basket of mending beside her. There was a letter folded near her elbow. Her sister, who lived several hours away, had lost a baby. Anna had known for 4 days. She had already arranged for another woman to travel with her the following morning. She had packed a small bag beneath our bed. She told me only because the driver was coming before sunrise. I remember being angry that she had made plans without me. The anger came quickly because it was easier than asking why she had not trusted me with her grief. I said she should have come to me first. She lowered her eyes and explained very gently that she already knew what I would say. There was no accusation in her voice. That made it worse. She believed she knew my answer because I had trained her to expect it. I let her go, but even then I acted as though I were granting permission rather than recognizing her duty to a grieving sister. The house was quiet after she left. Our children slept upstairs. The clock on the shelf struck 6, then 7. I sat at the same table where she had written the travel arrangements without me. The lamp made a small yellow circle on the wood. Outside that circle, the room seemed larger and emptier than it had before. For the first time, I wondered how many decisions had been made inside our home that I knew nothing about, not because Anna was deceptive, but because I had made honesty expensive. She returned 3 days later. I wanted to apologize, but I did not know how to begin without surrendering the image I had built of myself. So I did what proud men often do. I became helpful. I carried her bag. I fed the chickens before she asked. I repaired the loose latch on the pantry door. These were good things, but they were not the needed thing. Work can become another place to hide. A repaired latch does not answer for years of refusing to hear your wife. The change in me did not happen all at once. I wish I could say I understood that evening and became different the next morning. That would make a clean story. Real regret is usually less tidy. I noticed the damage, then defended myself against what I had noticed. I told myself Anna was naturally reserved. I told myself every marriage settled into routines. I told myself a household could not run by discussion. Some of that was true in part. A farm does need decisions. Children do need clear boundaries. Bills do not wait until everyone feels ready, but truth used to protect a lie becomes part of the lie. The question was never whether I had responsibility. The question was whether responsibility required me to stand alone and keep my wife beneath my decisions. I began to understand the answer during a hard spring when I was 35. We had 4 children by then. Rain fell for 12 days out of 16, and water stood between the rows like strips of dull metal. The dairy check was smaller than expected. A buyer backed away from a furniture order that had taken me 6 weeks to complete. I had been carrying the numbers in my head, refusing to show Anna how narrow our margin had become. I believed I was protecting her. In reality, I was protecting myself from being seen as frightened. One evening, she found 3 unpaid invoices beneath a ledger in my desk. She did not confront me with anger. She placed them on the kitchen table and waited. I felt exposed. My first instinct was to explain that the finances were my burden. The old sentence from the carriage shed was still inside me, though my father had been gone 2 years by then. A steady hand, not a listening ear. I had followed that advice so faithfully that I had become a stranger in my own marriage whenever life became difficult. I looked at Anna's face across the table. There were fine lines beside her eyes that had not been there on our wedding day. Her hands were red from wash water. She had shared my work, borne our children, stretched meals, sat beside sick beds, and stood with me through every poor harvest. Yet I had treated the truth about our finances as though it belonged only to me. I finally told her everything. I told her how much we owed. I told her the order had been canceled. I told her I had lain awake for 6 nights trying to decide whether to sell a team of horses or ask my brother for another loan. The words came slowly. Each one felt like setting down a stone I had insisted on carrying alone. Anna listened. Then she showed me that she had been keeping careful household records for years. She knew which expenses could be delayed. She knew a cousin who needed steady furniture work for a store 2 towns away. She had already noticed that our oldest mare was costing more in feed than she returned in labor. Within 1 hour, she did not solve every problem, but she made the problems smaller because they were no longer hidden inside one man's pride. That evening changed something in me, though change still required practice. Listening is not simply remaining silent while another person speaks. I had done that many times. Real listening meant allowing what Anna said to affect the decision. It meant entering a conversation without already knowing where it must end. It meant admitting that leadership can be corrected without being destroyed. At first, I was clumsy. I would ask her opinion, then argue with it before she finished. I would bring her 2 choices after quietly eliminating the third choice she preferred. I would say we had decided something together when I had only persuaded her to accept my plan. She noticed, though she rarely said so. I had to learn to notice myself. One of the hardest moments came when our oldest son, Daniel, was 16. He wanted to spend more time in a cabinet shop and less time working our fields. I saw danger in it. The shop was farther from home, and the men there came from several districts. I believed farm work would keep him closer to us. Anna believed his skill with wood was not a rebellion, but a gift. My old habit would have been to decide before supper and announce it afterward. Instead, I asked her to tell me everything she saw that I did not. That question took less than 10 seconds. Her answer took nearly an hour. She reminded me that Daniel had repaired a broken drawer at age 9 without being shown. She reminded me that he became careless in the field when his mind was elsewhere, but worked with complete attention at the bench. She had watched him more closely than I had because I had been busy measuring obedience. We let him take the position. Years later, the income from that work helped him begin a household of his own. Had I refused to listen, I might have called my stubbornness protection and pushed my son away with both hands. There were other changes. Anna began speaking sooner, before her thoughts were polished for my approval. That was not always comfortable. Peace became noisier. We disagreed about money, discipline, travel, and the amount of work our daughters should carry during school weeks. Some conversations ended without an immediate answer. I used to believe an unresolved discussion meant I had failed to lead. Now I understand that rushing to resolution can be another kind of failure. A decision made one day later, after both people have been heard, is often stronger than a decision made in 1 minute, so a man can feel certain. I also had to face the harm that could not be undone. Apology does not return the years in which Anna learned to keep parts of herself away from me. It does not erase the morning she traveled to her grieving sister without believing I would understand. It does not change the nights she worried beside a coughing child while I treated concern as weakness. Forgiveness is a gift, but it is not a claim that nothing was lost. When I told Anna I regretted the way I had led our home, she did not give me a dramatic answer. She sat beside the kitchen window, threading a needle. She listened. Then she placed the needle through the cloth and continued the seam. Her trust returned in the same way, one small stitch at a time. That is how most marriages are repaired, not through one speech, but through repeated proof. A husband listens when the subject seems small. He listens when he is tired. He listens when the answer threatens a plan he has already made. He listens without punishing honesty through silence, anger, or ridicule. Over time, the other person learns that speaking is safe again. I still believe a husband carries responsibility. I do not regret taking that responsibility seriously. What I regret is confusing responsibility with control. A steady man is not a man who never bends. A tree that cannot bend in the wind does not prove its strength for long. Steadiness means remaining faithful when the truth is uncomfortable. It means hearing correction without making your wife pay for giving it. It means being strong enough to say that you do not know. The advice I received on my wedding day came from my father's own life. I understand that now. He had been raised by a harder man. He believed distance protected authority because distance was what he knew. I can honor the work my father did, the sacrifices he made, and the faith he tried to preserve without repeating every wound he handed to me. Respect does not require imitation. Tradition can carry wisdom across generations, but it can also carry fear, pride, and habits no one has examined for a long time. The duty of a grown man is not to reject everything old or accept everything old. It is to test what he has been given by its fruit. Did it make me more patient, more truthful, more faithful? Did it help my wife become fully known in her own home? For many years, the answer was no. That is why I regret listening. Not because I should have ignored my father in anger, but because I should have listened to him with judgment instead of surrendering my judgment to him. I should have held his advice beside the life of the woman I had promised to love. I should have noticed when the fruit became silence. I should have understood that a man who demands to be heard but refuses to hear is not leading. He is standing in the doorway and calling the blockage order. Today, Anna and I have been married more than 2 decades. We still do not agree on everything. I am still quicker to speak than I should be. Sometimes she gives me a look across the table, and I know I have begun answering a question she has not finished. I stop. Not always gracefully, but I stop. The brass key from our first house hangs on a small nail inside my workshop. The house itself belongs to another family now. The key opens nothing I own. I keep it because it reminds me of the morning I mistook certainty for wisdom. It also reminds me that a man can carry bad counsel for years and still choose to set it down. What I understand now is simple. Your wife does not need you to be the loudest voice in the home. She needs to know her voice can reach you. Authority without listening becomes loneliness for everyone beneath the same roof, including the man who believes he is in charge. If this story gave you something to consider, subscribe and join me for more honest stories from Amish life, family, work, and faith. And tell me in the comments, what is one piece of advice you once accepted because of who said it, only to question it later?